Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today's time to do the week review for the 2023 USFL Semifinals, or the Division Championships. These two games were two games that were very polar opposite type of games, as I put some polls out in the community tab. If you haven't, go check it out. And at least at the moment, you all have voted that the best game and the worst game in the modern USFL both came from these playoffs. So, which ones? Well, the scores pretty much easily tell it. The Panthers ended up getting beat by the Maulers 31-27 in an OT thriller. Great game that you guys voted as the best. And then the worst game that you guys have voted is the Stallions absolute clinic that they put on the Breakers, 47-22. Two games that are very different. So as for the first game, we have the Panthers versus the Maulers. As I said, this game went to OT. This game was very reminiscent of Super Bowl 38. That's the Panthers-Patriots one, where essentially you had a very sluggish, defensive-heavy beginning of the game. Then you had this random outburst of points in the second half. As the first half, you ended up having 6 points in the first quarter, 7 in the second, for a total of 13. Then you had 14 by the Panthers themselves in the third quarter. Add on another 27 in the fourth quarter. You had a much higher scoring fourth quarter, and then OT. Now, in terms of what really ended up happening in this game, the Panthers were blessed with insanely long receptions. Essentially, as you can clearly see, they're 9.7 yards per attempt. They had a lot of passes that were just insanely deep balls. They had like 6 players have 10 plus receiving catches. But what really doomed the Panthers were penalties and turnovers. The penalties and turnovers really did a number on them. When you consider that and the fact they were beaten time possession, you can clearly tell where the issues were. Simply, the team just lacked a lot of discipline. And at the end of the game in OT, they missed their 2-point conversion chances on both of them. And though some people complaining about the first one, no, the rule is that you cannot advance a fumble in the end of the couple minutes or OT. That's been in the league and in all football for a while. That's the holy roller rule. So the Panthers ended up losing in OT, but it was really great to see the first game in the playoffs this season be the first overtime game of the season and the second ever. And I believe this is the second time the Panthers lost 31-27 in an OT game. Now, as for the Breakers versus Stallions, yikes. This game is most summed up on just the players. Simply put, you had one group of players in Magoo, Maribel, and Person who were far better than the Breakers, MBT, Wes, and Jones. Simply, quarterback-wise, Alex Magoo absolutely creamed MBT in stats. He had a much better completion percentage, more yards on less completions and attempts, or less attempts, and then he also had a way better passer rating. Magoo's 139.8, I believe, is the highest in the modern USFL. That is literally just a couple. That's like less than 20 points off of perfect, so that's insane. And the fact is they had 3 separate running backs. Well, 2 running backs in Magoo who averaged at least 6 yards a carry on multiple carries, versus the Breakers who, if you get rid of each Jones and Hill's long, they averaged like 3 and 4 yards respectively, and they never really got enough chances. It wasn't too surprising to see this team lose. The Breakers, they just played way worse from the start of the game, so it is what it is. So in terms of the home games, we only had one home game, and that was the Stallions. Now, a quick note, the Tom Benson playoff game was just like most of the other ones. It was like a more packed normal game, so it was just a couple thousand. It wasn't really a note. It was still not great, but the main question for that stadium is how good is it going to be in the title game? Is it going to match last year's? And as for the Stallions, massive W. Now, if you watch this game in the fourth quarter, it'll look like the attendance was completely bare, and that's because everybody left because the game was a blowout. But legitimately, this was the best attendance this team has had the entire year. It was very obvious from the beginning, as the away side actually had some people in it instead of like nobody. And the home side was nearly fully packed. This was definitely a 15,000 plus, and maybe matched some of those Birmingham Iron games from the AAF, 17,000 in terms of ticket sales. So this was a legit good way to end the season. It was a great win for them, so very solid. Now, in terms of players of the week, I know this is out of order because, well, this is my opinion for players of the week. Usually, the USFL puts out some players in the Twitter verse votes, but they didn't do that this time, so here are mine. Offensive player of the week, Alex Magoo. Obviously, 8 rushes for 84 yards passing, a TD, and he had 4 over the air for a 139 passer rating, 310 yards, 67.7 collision percentage, 10 yards per attempt. This was so easy. Magoo was clearly the best player on offense this week. Now, defense player of the week, I picked Frank Gidna. Though this is close, I could understand Gerard Fernandez or Brian Allen pick here. But I went with Gidna because, put it simply, he was basically the only player that really showed up for the whole game in the Panthers defense. He wasn't one of those guys that took a ton of penalties. His 1 sack, 2 TFLs were nearly every single special stat, that wasn't a solo or regular tackle, while also leading the team in tackles. No, he was on the losing side, as you can see in the picture. It's great. Um, he still was the best defender, I think, over the week. Now, like I said, Fernandez and Allen both have very good cases, and if you pick one of those, I totally understand it. Special teams for the week was a bit tougher. Well, not as tough, but I went with Brandon Aubrey. I think that overall Aubrey was just better than all the other guys. Even though he did miss an extra point, he still went 5 of 6 in extra points and 2 and 2 from field goals, which included 41. But the main reason is that he did have 4 touchbacks on kickoffs. You know anything? Last year, when the kickoffs were easier to get kickoffs in the touchback, it was like 80% that it was going to be returned. So to have 4 kickoffs be touchbacks in a single game, that's impressive. So I think this is an easy one for Aubrey. Congrats to all those guys for what I believe are the players of the week. Now, in terms of TV ratings, the Panthers-Maulers game on NBC primetime had 960,000 viewers for a 0.6 rating, and then the Breakers-Stallions on Fox ended up having a 850,000 viewership for a 0.5 rating. Now, comparatively, compared to last year had a Fox game that was at just random 3 p.m. that had 960,000 for a 0.6 rating. That was also a solid game in the Stars Generals. And then the Breakers Stallions blowout as well got 1 million viewers for a 0.7 rating on NBC primetime. And coincidentally, they were both in the same day, which very, very weird that they did that, but it was. Then as for the XFL, the XFL both had their games on ESPN, which is basically like a over-the-air channel for the most part. And their Renegades Roughnecks had 680,000 in primetime. And then their Dragons Defenders game that was supposed to be the more hyped up matchup ended up only having 480,000 at 3 p.m. So overall, in terms of the ratings, I think this is a very solid showing. Even though they didn't, even though they only matched one of the games last year, and it was the one that was at 3 p.m., the fact they were still so much better than the XFL ratings, as you've seen before, ESPN is legitimately a competitor, especially with sports. So I think it's a huge W. The USFL was able to get those numbers. And I think the big reason is that you have the less viewership per year, as essentially the viewers per game are less than last year, which is to be expected, I think, because of the fact that you have the lack of, it's a new league or a new season. The fact that it was able to beat both the XFL, both games by a wide margin, and the fact that it was close to the USFL last year, I think is a good sign. Especially when you consider that Breaker Steins game probably lost 100,000 viewers at least due to how bad of a game it was, as it was a complete blowout. So I think that overall, they were solid ratings. So that'll do it for this week's week review. Be on the lookout for the betting picks and, of course, videos to come next week. There's been Zom Fox. If you enjoy this content, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. We have off-season content coming up soon. A lot of rankings. We still have the awards to see what happens. And as always, have a great night.